The dust rose in clouds around Violet Owens's boots as she crouched beside the trembling cattle dog, her calloused hands gentle, despite the September heat, bearing down on the New Mexico territory in 1882. The rancher who'd brought the young border collie to her homestead near Chloride stood with his hat in his hands, desperation etched across his weathered face as he watched her work her particular brand of magic with animals that other trainers had given up on as lost causes. "I cannot take payment until I know he'll work proper for you," Violet said, her voice carrying that peculiar blend of firmness and warmth that seemed to reach into the hearts of even the most stubborn creatures. She was 23 years old. With auburn hair she kept pinned back in a practical bun, and eyes the color of new grass that seemed to see right through to the soul of every animal she encountered. Her reputation had spread across 3 counties in the past 5 years since she'd started her training business, and ranchers traveled days just to have her work with their dogs. The border collie, a black and white male named Dash, had been spooked by a rattlesnake 2 months prior and refused to go near cattle since. His owner, Mr. Henderson, had tried everything from patience to force, and nothing had worked. Now the dog cowered at Violet's feet, and she simply sat in the dirt beside him, not touching, not speaking, just breathing in rhythm with the animal's rapid pants until gradually, incrementally, his breathing slowed to match hers. "How long have you been doing this, Miss Owens?" Henderson asked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Since I was old enough to walk, I suppose," Violet replied, still focused on the dog. "My father worked for a rancher in Texas before he passed. I spent more time with the working dogs than I did with other children. Seemed like I understood them better, and they understood me." She had moved to New Mexico territory 3 years ago after her mother's death, using the small inheritance to buy 10 acres outside Chloride and build a modest house and several training pens. The town itself sat in the Black Range, a mining community that had sprung up when silver was discovered. It was rough country, beautiful and harsh in equal measure, and Violet had made it her home with the same determination she applied to everything else in her life. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention away from Dash. A rider approached from the east, silhouetted against the bright sky, and even before she could make out his features, Violet recognized the easy way he sat his horse, like he'd been born in the saddle. That would be Isaac Turner, the cowboy who worked the largest ranch in the area, the Triple Creek spread that encompassed nearly 15,000 acres of grazing land and employed over 20 men year-round. Isaac dismounted with fluid grace, his long legs eating up the distance between his horse and where Violet sat with the trembling dog. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes the color of strong coffee. At 26, he'd already earned a reputation as one of the best cattlemen in the territory, a man who could track a lost steer through a thunderstorm and gentle a wild Mustang with nothing but patience and quiet words. "Miss Owens," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. His voice was deep and carried a Texas drawl that spoke of his origins further south. "Mr. Patterson sent me to ask if you might have time to work with a new dog he just acquired. Young pup, maybe 8 months old, needs training from the ground up." Violet looked up at him, shading her eyes against the sun. This was the 4th time Isaac Turner had ridden out from Triple Creek in the past 2 months, always with some request from his employer, always polite and respectful. But there was something in his eyes that suggested the trips were about more than just ranch business. "I have a waiting list, Mr. Turner, as you well know," she said, returning her attention to Dash. "But for Mr. Patterson, I will make time next month. Bring the pup by on the first Monday." Much appreciated, Isaac said, but he did not immediately remount. Instead, he crouched down a respectful distance away, watching her work with the same intensity she usually reserved for the animals. That Henderson's dog, it is. Rattlesnake spooked him badly. He's lost his confidence around cattle. Isaac nodded slowly, his gaze moving from Violet to the dog and back again. I have seen you work before, Miss Owens. If anyone can bring him back, it would be you. There was genuine admiration in his voice, and Violet felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. She was used to ranchers treating her with a mixture of skepticism and desperation, seeing her as a last resort rather than a skilled professional. But Isaac Turner had always spoken to her like an equal, another person who understood animals and the land, who respected the work she did. "You are kind to say so," she replied, and their eyes met for a moment longer than strictly necessary before she forced herself to look away. She could not afford distractions, not when she had worked so hard to build her reputation and her business. Romance had no place in her carefully ordered life, even if the cowboy did have the most disarming smile she had ever seen. Isaac seemed to understand the dismissal. He stood, tipped his hat again to both Violet and Henderson, and swung back into his saddle with the practiced ease of a man who spent more time on horseback than on foot. Violet watched him ride away from the corner of her eye, noting the straight line of his back and the way his horse responded to the lightest touch of the reins. He was good with animals, too, she had observed on previous visits. That said something important about a man's character. "That Turner fellow is sweet on you," Henderson observed with a knowing grin once Isaac had disappeared down the dusty road toward town. Violet felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He is merely conducting business for his employer." "If you say so, Miss Owens." "But I've got eyes in my head, and that man does not look at you like you are just a dog trainer." She did not dignify that with a response, turning her full attention back to Dash. Over the next hour, she worked with the border collie using techniques she had developed through years of observation and instinct. She never forced the dog to do anything, instead creating situations where he could make choices and gradually rebuild his confidence. By the time the sun had reached its zenith, Dash was taking treats from her hand and his tail had stopped being permanently tucked between his legs. "Bring him back tomorrow," she told Henderson. "Same time, and the day after that and the day after that. This will take time, but he will work cattle again. You have my word." Henderson paid her a deposit and loaded Dash into his wagon with considerably more hope in his expression than when he had arrived. Violet watched them leave, then walked back to her house, a simple wooden structure with a covered porch and windows that let in the cross breeze. Her nearest neighbor was 2 miles away, which suited her perfectly. She had 3 dogs of her own, all rescues she had trained and kept, and they greeted her with enthusiastic tails and wet noses as she entered. "Hello, my darlings," she murmured, scratching ears and accepting kisses. There was Brandy, a golden retriever mix with a scarred muzzle from some long-ago fight. Mouse, a small terrier with oversized ears and more courage than sense. And Duke, an aging shepherd who had been her first rescue and remained her most devoted companion. They were her family, her constant companions in a life that could be lonely but was never empty. She prepared a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and dried apples, eating on the porch while her dogs sprawled in the shade. The view from her property stretched for miles, all sage and scrub and the distant purple mountains that marked the horizon. It was beautiful in a stark way that matched her own personality, she sometimes thought. Nothing soft or easy about this land, but rich with life if you knew where to look. Her thoughts drifted back to Isaac Turner despite her best efforts to redirect them. She had first met him 18 months ago when he had brought a dog to her that had been kicked by a horse and developed an aggressive streak. She had worked with the animal for 3 months, slowly and patiently rebuilding its trust in humans, and Isaac had come by every week to check on the progress. They had talked during those visits, carefully and politely at first, but gradually with more ease and openness. She had learned that he had come to New Mexico from Texas 5 years earlier, following the death of his parents in a fever outbreak. He had a younger sister married to a shopkeeper in Santa Fe, and he sent her money every month to help with her children. He loved the work of ranching, the daily challenges, and the satisfaction of caring for the land and the animals. He read books whenever he could get his hands on them, unusual for a cowboy, and he had opinions on everything from politics to poetry that revealed an educated mind behind the weathered exterior. And he had never once treated her as anything less than his equal, never suggested that her work was somehow less important because she was a woman, never shown anything but respect and genuine interest in what she did. That alone set him apart from most of the men she encountered. But Violet had learned early that independence came at a price, and that price was often loneliness. Men did not want women who could do things for themselves, who had their own businesses and their own money. They wanted wives who would cook and clean and bear children and never question or challenge. She had built something here that mattered, and she would not give it up for anyone, no matter how kind his eyes or how warm his smile. The afternoon passed in a familiar routine of chores and training. She had 2 other dogs boarding with her currently, both young and eager to learn. She worked with each for an hour, teaching basic commands and beginning the specialized training that would make them valuable working dogs. By the time the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, she was tired in the good way that came from honest work, her muscles pleasantly sore and her mind clear. She was feeding her own dogs when she heard horses approaching again. This time there were 2 riders, and as they drew closer, she recognized Isaac Turner and another man from Triple Creek, a weathered cowboy named Samuel who served as foreman. Both men looked serious, and a flutter of concern moved through Violet's chest. "Miss Owens," Isaac said as they dismounted. "I apologize for disturbing you again, but we have a situation that Mr. Patterson thought you might be able to help with." "What kind of situation?" Violet asked, drying her hands on her apron. Samuel spoke up, his voice gravelly with age and tobacco. "We have got a wolf problem. Lost 3 calves in the past week, all killed the same way. We tracked the wolf to its den today, and there are pups. 4 of them may be 6 weeks old. The mother is dead, killed by a rancher from the next property over before we could stop him." Violet felt her heart sink. "And you want me to take the pups? They will die if we leave them," Isaac said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I know wolves are not dogs. I know they are wild, but they are just babies. Mr. Patterson said if you could take them and maybe train them, or at least keep them until they can survive on their own, he would pay whatever you asked." She should say no. Wolf pups were not domestic dogs. They could never be fully tamed, and keeping them would be dangerous and time-consuming. But she looked at Isaac's face and saw genuine concern for the orphaned animals, saw the same respect for life that she carried in her own heart, and she found herself nodding before she could think better of it. "Bring them tomorrow morning," she said. "Early, before the heat sets in. I will need to build a separate pen, something very secure. And I need to be clear that I cannot guarantee they will survive or that they can ever be released back into the wild. This is not a simple matter of training." "We understand," Isaac said, and his smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Thank you, Miss Owens. This means a great deal, not just to Mr. Patterson, but to me personally. I know what it is like to lose your mother." There was a depth of emotion in those simple words that caught Violet off guard. She had not thought about Isaac as someone who had experienced real loss, though of course he had mentioned his parents' deaths. But hearing him connect his own grief to the plight of 4 wolf pups revealed a capacity for empathy that touched something deep inside her chest. "I will do my best," she promised, and she meant it. The 2 men rode away as the last light faded from the sky, and Violet stood on her porch long after they had disappeared, watching the stars emerge one by one against the darkening blue. Her dogs pressed against her legs, sensing her troubled thoughts, and she ran her fingers through their fur for comfort. She did not sleep well that night, her mind occupied with plans for the wolf pen and concerns about the wisdom of what she had agreed to do. But underneath all of that was another current of thought, one she was less willing to examine. Isaac Turner had ridden out twice in one day, ostensibly on ranch business. But there had been something in his eyes when he looked at her, something warm and hopeful that called to a part of herself she had tried to keep locked away. The morning came crisp and clear, autumn beginning to assert itself even in the desert heat. Violet was up before dawn, working on the pen she would need for the wolf pups. She built it in a corner of her property away from the house, using the sturdiest post she could find and securing the wire mesh with extra care. Wolves were intelligent and strong, even as pups, and she could not risk them escaping or her own dogs getting too close. She was hammering the last post into place when Isaac arrived, this time alone. He carried a wooden crate lined with blankets, and even from a distance, Violet could hear the high-pitched whimpering of the pups inside. "They are scared," Isaac said unnecessarily as he set the crate down near the new pen. "They have not eaten since we found them yesterday. Samuel tried to get them to take some milk from a bottle, but they would not have it." Violet approached the crate carefully, getting down on her knees to peer inside. 4 pairs of eyes stared back at her, blue-gray and frightened, set in faces that were adorable and heartbreaking in equal measure. The pups were huddled together in a tight ball, trembling, their small bodies speaking of trauma and confusion. "Oh, you poor things," she murmured, her voice automatically dropping to the soothing tone she used with all frightened animals. "You do not understand what has happened, do you?" She did not try to touch them immediately. Instead, she sat beside the crate, simply being present, letting them get used to her scent and her voice. Isaac watched her with fascination, settling himself on the ground a few feet away. "How do you do that?" he asked quietly. "How do you know just what they need?" "I do not always know," Violet admitted, not taking her eyes off the pups. "But I try to imagine what I would feel in their place. They have lost everything familiar, everything safe. The last thing they need is someone forcing themselves into their space. They need to know they have some control, some choice." "That is a good philosophy for more than just animals," Isaac observed, and there was something in his voice that made Violet glance at him. He was looking at her with an expression that was hard to define, a mixture of respect and something deeper, something that made her pulse quicken. "Mr. Turner," she began, but he held up a hand. "Isaac," he said, "please just call me Isaac. We have known each other long enough to dispense with the formalities. Do you not think?" Violet felt herself on uncertain ground. Familiarity led to friendship, friendship led to other things, and other things led to complications she had spent years avoiding. But there was no denying the appeal of the man sitting beside her, his presence solid and comforting, his understanding of what she did almost perfect. "Isaac," she repeated, testing the sound of his name in her mouth. "Then you should call me Violet." His smile could have lit the whole territory. "Violet, it suits you." They sat together in companionable silence as the sun climbed higher, watching the wolf pups gradually relax in their crate. After about an hour, Violet carefully opened the door and reached in, not trying to grab any of the pups, but simply offering her hand for them to investigate. The bravest of the four, a male with a distinctive white patch on his chest, crept forward and sniffed her fingers with a tiny wet nose. "There you are," she said softly. "That is right. I am not going to hurt you." Over the next several hours, with Isaac's patient assistance, they managed to transfer the pups into the new pen and get them to take some milk mixed with raw egg from a shallow bowl. It was exhausting work that required infinite patience, but by midday, all four pups had eaten something and were exploring their new enclosure with cautious curiosity. "You have a gift," Isaac said as they stood watching the pups play with a piece of rope Violet had left in the pen. "I have never seen anyone work with animals the way you do. It is not so much a gift as a great deal of practice and observation," Violet replied, though she could not help feeling pleased by his words. "Animals are honest in ways that people often are not. If you pay attention, they tell you exactly what they need." Isaac turned to face her directly, his expression serious. "Can I be honest with you, Violet?" Her heart began to beat faster. "Of course. I have been looking for reasons to ride out here for months now. Mr. Patterson does need your help with dogs. That is all true, but I volunteer to be the one to come every single time because I want to see you. I want to talk to you. You are the most fascinating woman I have ever met, and I find myself thinking about you at the oddest times. When I am riding fence line or working cattle or trying to sleep at night, you are there in my mind." Violet's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected his interest, but hearing it stated so plainly was both thrilling and terrifying. "Isaac, I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything right now," he assured her. "I am not asking for any promises or commitments. I just wanted you to know how I feel. I wanted to be honest, the way you said animals are honest." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw sincerity written in every line of his face. This was not some cowboy looking for a temporary diversion or a wife to cook his meals. This was a man who saw her for who she truly was and valued that person. "I value your honesty," she said carefully. "And I will not pretend that I have not thought about you as well. But my life is complicated, Isaac. I have worked hard to build something here that is mine, something that gives me independence and purpose. I have seen too many women give up everything for marriage and then lose themselves entirely. I would never ask you to give up what you have built," Isaac said with fierce conviction. "What you do matters, Violet. It matters to the ranchers who depend on your skills. It matters to the animals you help, and it should matter most of all to you. Any man who would ask you to stop would be a fool and not worthy of your time." His words hit her like a physical force, knocking down barriers she had spent years constructing. "You truly mean that? Every word? I have watched you work, Violet. I have seen the joy in your face when you break through to an animal that everyone else has given up on. I would sooner cut off my own arm than take that away from you." Violet felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, though she blinked them back. She was not a woman who cried easily, but something about Isaac's understanding reached past all her defenses. "I do not know how to do this," she admitted. "I have never allowed myself to even consider the possibility of anything more than friendship with any man. I do not know the rules or the expectations." Isaac stepped closer, not touching her but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Then let us make our own rules. Let us take this slow and see where it leads. No expectations, no assumptions. Just two people who enjoy each other's company, learning about each other." It was reasonable and respectful and exactly what she needed to hear. Violet found herself nodding, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I think I would like that. Then may I come calling on you? Properly, I mean, not just when ranch business brings me out this way. Yes, she said, the word feeling like stepping off a cliff, exhilarating and terrifying at once. Yes, you may. Isaac's answering smile was worth every moment of fear. They stood together by the wolf pen, watching the pups tumble over each other in play, and something new and fragile began to take root between them, like a desert plant finding water after a long drought. Over the following weeks, Isaac became a regular presence at Violet's homestead. He came every few days, always bringing something useful: lumber for repairs, supplies from town, once a whole side of beef that he helped her butcher and smoke. They worked together training dogs, mending fences, caring for the wolf pups that were growing rapidly and becoming more confident with each passing day. They talked about everything during those visits. Isaac told her about his childhood in Texas, about learning to ride almost before he could walk, about the grief of losing both parents within a week of each other to yellow fever. Violet shared her own history, the loneliness of being different from other girls, the way her father had encouraged her unusual interests, while her mother had despaired of ever seeing her properly settled. She loved me, Violet said one afternoon as they sat on her porch, watching storm clouds build over the mountains. But she did not understand me. She wanted me to want the things other women wanted: a husband, children, a proper home. And I wanted those things, in theory, but not at the cost of losing myself. You do not have to lose yourself, Isaac said, his hand finding hers where it rested on the porch railing. His touch was warm and calloused and felt entirely right. The right person would not ask that of you. She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. It was the first time they had really touched beyond accidental brushes and polite assists, and the contact sent electricity racing up her arm. Is that what you are, Isaac? The right person? I do not know, he said honestly. But I would like the chance to find out. I would like the chance to prove to you that a man can be as faithful and true as any of the dogs you train. The comparison made her laugh, breaking the tension. That is a high standard, you know. Dogs are remarkably loyal creatures. Then I will just have to work hard to measure up, he replied, his eyes dancing with humor but also something deeper, something that made her breath catch. The kiss happened gradually, neither of them quite sure who moved first. His lips were soft against hers, tentative and questioning, and she answered by leaning into him, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel the rapid beating of his heart. The kiss deepened naturally, a conversation without words, and when they finally pulled apart, Violet felt dizzy and more alive than she could remember feeling in years. I have wanted to do that since the first day I met you, Isaac confessed, his forehead resting against hers. You were working with that aggressive dog, the one I brought you, and you were so calm and confident. You looked at that animal like you could see straight into its soul, and I thought, there is a woman who truly sees. I see you, Violet said softly. I see your kindness and your patience. I see the way you treat animals with respect, the way you listen when people talk, the way you never assume you know better just because you are a man. I see you, Isaac Turner, and I like what I see. They sat together as the storm rolled in, content in each other's presence, and Violet felt pieces of herself she had not even realized were broken beginning to mend. This was not the overwhelming passion she had read about in books, not the thunderbolt romance of dime novels. This was something deeper and more real, a connection built on mutual respect and genuine understanding. The wolf pups were nearly 3 months old when Mr. Patterson came to visit in person for the first time. He was a distinguished man in his 50s, graying at the temples and carrying himself with the authority of someone who had built an empire from nothing. He walked through Violet's property with sharp eyes that missed nothing, examining her facilities and her training methods with the thoroughness of a man who had not gotten rich by being careless. "Turner says you are the best dog trainer in the territory," Patterson said without preamble. "I need to know if that is his heart talking or his head." Violet bristled at the implication but kept her voice level. "You are welcome to judge my work for yourself, Mr. Patterson. I have several dogs currently in training that I would be happy to demonstrate with." "Show me," he said simply. So Violet put on a demonstration unlike any she had given before. She worked with each of her boarding dogs, showing their progress, explaining her methods, proving with actions rather than words that she knew exactly what she was doing. Patterson watched in silence, his expression giving nothing away until finally she brought out one of her own dogs, Duke, and demonstrated the complex series of commands the old shepherd could perform. "Impressive," Patterson admitted when she was done. Turner was not exaggerating. "You have a rare skill, Miss Owens." "Thank you, sir." "I want to make you an offer," Patterson continued, getting straight to the point. "Come work for Triple Creek full-time. I will build you facilities on the ranch, pay you a salary plus bonuses for each dog you train. You would have access to the best animals, the best equipment, everything you need." It was a generous offer, the kind most people in her position would accept without hesitation, but Violet felt her stomach clench with anxiety. Working for Patterson would mean giving up her independence, her own land, her autonomy. It would mean becoming an employee rather than her own boss. "That is very generous," she said carefully, "but I prefer working for myself on my own land. I am happy to continue training dogs for you on a contract basis, as I have been doing." Patterson's eyes narrowed. "I am offering you financial security and resources you could not possibly afford on your own." "I understand that, sir, but my independence is not for sale." There was a long moment of tense silence, and Violet wondered if she had just made a terrible mistake. Patterson was powerful and well-connected, and he could easily spread word that she was difficult to work with, damaging her reputation throughout the territory. But then Patterson smiled, a genuine expression of respect. "You remind me of myself at your age, Miss Owens. Too stubborn for your own good and twice as determined. Very well, we will continue as we have been, but the offer remains open should you ever change your mind." After Patterson left, Violet found herself shaking with a mixture of relief and residual fear. She had stood her ground, but at what cost? When Isaac arrived that evening for his regular visit, she told him what had happened, watching his face carefully for any sign of disapproval or concern. Instead, he pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I am proud of you," he said into her hair. "You did not let him push you into something you did not want, even though it would have been easier to agree. You are not worried that I offended your employer?" Violet asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "Patterson respects strength," Isaac replied. "You showed him strength today, and if he does hold it against you, well, there are other ranches and other jobs for me too." Violet pulled back to look at him in shock. "You would leave Triple Creek?" "You have been there for 5 years, Isaac. It is the best ranch in the territory. And you are the best woman I have ever known," he said simply. "I meant what I said about being faithful and true, Violet. That means standing by you when things are hard, not just when they are easy." She kissed him then, putting all her gratitude and growing affection into the embrace. They had been courting for nearly 2 months now, and every day she found new reasons to care for him, new evidence of his character and integrity. He was patient with her hesitations, understanding of her fears, and unwavering in his support of her independence. The weather turned colder as November arrived, bringing frost to the high desert mornings and forcing Violet to make preparations for winter. The wolf pups were nearly full-grown now, wild and beautiful and completely unsuitable as pets. She had kept them fed and safe, but she had deliberately avoided taming them, knowing they would need their natural instincts if they were ever to survive in the wild. "What will you do with them?" Isaac asked one evening as they watched the young wolves play in their enclosure. They were magnificent animals, gray and silver with intelligent eyes that showed both their youth and their untamed nature. "I need to release them," Violet said, though the thought pained her. She had spent months caring for these creatures, and she had grown attached despite her best efforts. They are old enough now to hunt for themselves, and winter is when they would naturally disperse from their birth pack. It is time. "Where will you release them?" "There are mountains about 20 miles north of here, remote enough that they should be safe from ranchers. I was hoping you might help me transport them there." Isaac agreed without hesitation, and 2 days later, they loaded the 4 young wolves into a specially built wagon and began the journey north. It was slow going over rough terrain, and they had to camp overnight in the foothills, sleeping in bedrolls beneath a canopy of stars so thick it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. You ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had made different choices? Violet asked, lying beside Isaac and looking up at the vast sky. They were not touching, propriety still dictating certain boundaries, but his presence beside her was warm and comforting. "Sometimes," Isaac admitted. "I wonder what might have happened if my parents had not died, if I had stayed in Texas, if I had chosen a different path. But then I think about where those different choices might have led, and I realize I might never have met you. So no, I do not wish for different choices. I am glad for the path that brought me here." Violet rolled onto her side to look at him, his profile illuminated by the firelight. "I am glad, too. I spent so many years thinking I had to be alone to be independent, that I could not have both freedom and companionship. You have shown me that was wrong. You showed yourself that, Violet. I just had the good fortune to be here while you figured it out." They released the wolves the next morning in a high mountain meadow far from any ranch or settlement. Violet opened the crates, and the 4 young animals bounded out, pausing only briefly to look back at the humans who had cared for them. Then they vanished into the trees, becoming shadows and ghosts, returning to the wild where they belonged. Violet cried, which surprised her. She did not cry often or easily, but watching the wolves disappear felt like letting go of something precious and irreplaceable. Isaac wrapped his arms around her, letting her tears soak into his shirt, not offering empty platitudes or telling her not to be sad. He simply held her while she grieved, understanding that loss could be the right choice and still hurt terribly. "They will be fine," he said eventually when her tears had subsided. "You gave them the best possible start. You saved their lives and prepared them to live free. That is a gift, Violet." She nodded against his chest, knowing he was right but still feeling the ache of separation. They rode back to Chloride in contemplative silence, the empty wagon rattling behind them, and Violet felt something shift inside her chest. She had spent months caring for those wolves, pouring her energy and attention into their well-being, and now they were gone. The emptiness they left behind made her realize how much of her life was defined by temporary connections, animals who came and went, never staying permanently. "Will you come inside when we get back?" she asked Isaac as they approached her property. It was late afternoon, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon, and the question held implications beyond simple hospitality. Isaac looked at her, understanding the deeper meaning in her invitation. "Are you sure?" "I am sure that I do not want to be alone tonight," Violet said honestly. "I am sure that I trust you more than I have ever trusted anyone. Beyond that, I cannot promise anything, but I want you here with me." They tended to the horses together, working in companionable silence, and then Isaac followed her into the house. Violet built up the fire while he lit the lamps, domestic tasks that felt intimate in their ordinariness. Her own dogs greeted them enthusiastically, tails wagging and noses investigating, accepting Isaac as part of the pack now. They made dinner together. Nothing fancy, just beans and cornbread and coffee, but sharing the meal felt significant in ways Violet could not quite articulate. This was what partnership could look like, she realized. Not one person serving the other, but two people working together toward a common goal, supporting each other's efforts, creating something through collaboration that neither could achieve alone. "I have been thinking," Isaac said as they cleaned up after dinner. "About us, about the future, about what comes next." Violet felt her heart begin to race. "And what have you concluded?" "That I love you," he said simply, turning to face her with such openness in his expression that it took her breath away. "I love your strength and your independence. I love the way you care for animals with such fierce devotion. I love your stubbornness and your honesty and the way you challenge me to be better than I am. I love you, Violet Owens, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I am worthy of your love in return." She stood frozen, her hands still holding the plate she had been drying, her mind racing to process what he had just said. Love. He loved her. And the terrifying thing was that she loved him too, had probably loved him for weeks now without admitting it to herself. "I love you too," she whispered, setting down the plate before she dropped it. "I did not want to. I tried not to, but Isaac, I love you so much it scares me." He crossed the small space between them in 2 strides, taking her face in his hands, his thumbs gentle against her cheeks. "Why does it scare you?" "Because love means vulnerability. It means giving someone the power to hurt you. It means risking everything I have built. Or it means gaining a partner who will help you build even more," Isaac countered. "Violet, I am not asking you to give up anything. I am offering to add to what you already have, my strength to support yours, my faith to bolster you when yours falters, my life intertwined with yours if you will have me." "Are you proposing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet," he said with a small smile. "When I propose, it will be with a ring and a properly planned speech. This is just me telling you what is in my heart and asking if there is room in yours for me." "There is room," Violet assured him, her own hands coming up to cover his where they still cradled her face. "There is so much room, Isaac. I just need you to be patient with me while I learn how to do this. I have spent so long alone that sometimes I forget how to let someone in." "I can be patient," he promised. "I have gentled wild horses and tracked lost cattle through storms. I can wait as long as you need, Violet. I am not going anywhere." They kissed then, deeper and more passionate than before, and Violet felt herself surrendering to the feelings she had fought for so long. Isaac lifted her easily, carrying her the few steps to her bedroom, and they tumbled onto the bed together, hands exploring and hearts racing. They loved each other with tenderness and urgency, discovering the landscape of skin and breath and sensation, and afterward, Violet lay in Isaac's arms feeling more complete than she had ever imagined possible. "Stay," she murmured against his chest. "Stay tonight, stay always." "Always," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "For as long as you will have me, I will stay." Winter settled over New Mexico in earnest, bringing cold winds and occasional snow that dusted the desert in white before melting away. Isaac continued to work at Triple Creek, but he spent every evening and night at Violet's homestead, riding the 10 miles between ranch and house without complaint. They fell into a rhythm that felt natural and right, working together during the day, sharing meals and conversation and warmth during the long winter nights. Talk of marriage became inevitable. Isaac's sister wrote from Santa Fe inviting them both to visit, making it clear that she expected to meet the woman who had captured her brother's heart. Violet's few friends in Chloride began referring to Isaac as her intended, assuming an engagement even though none had been officially announced. And Violet found herself thinking more and more about what it would mean to be Isaac's wife, to formally bind her life to his. "What are your thoughts on children?" Isaac asked one evening in late December as they sat before the fire, Violet mending a torn shirt while he oiled his saddle tack. The question caught her off guard, though she supposed she should have anticipated it. "I have never given it much thought," she admitted. "I always assumed I would not marry, so children seemed like an impossibility. But now," he pressed gently. Violet set down her mending, considering carefully before she answered. "I suppose I would like children if they came, but I would need to know that having them would not mean giving up my work. I could not be one of those women who disappears into motherhood and nothing else." "You could never be anything other than yourself," Isaac said with conviction. "And any children we have would be lucky to have a mother who teaches them independence and strength." "You keep saying when and if as though marriage between us is a certainty," Violet observed, though there was no heat in the words. "You have not actually proposed yet, you know." Isaac looked up with a grin. "I am waiting for the right moment. And when will that be?" "You will know it when it happens." The right moment came on Christmas Eve. They had attended services in Chloride that morning, standing together in the small church while the choir sang carols, and the preacher spoke about love and redemption. Afterward, they had ridden back to Violet's homestead, enjoying the crisp air and the way the winter sun made the desert sparkle. Isaac insisted on cooking dinner himself, shooing Violet out of the kitchen with instructions to relax. She sat on the porch with her dogs, bundled in a heavy coat, watching the sun set in spectacular fashion, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple that no artist could truly capture. When Isaac called her back inside, she found the table set with more care than usual, candles lit, and a simple meal of roasted chicken and vegetables laid out. He had even found wildflowers somewhere, dried ones at this time of year, but arranged in a jar in the center of the table. "What is all this?" she asked, touched by the effort he had put into creating something special. "This is me telling you that you are worth celebrating," Isaac said, pulling out her chair for her. "Every single day with you is a gift, Violet, and I wanted tonight to reflect that." They ate slowly, savoring the food and the company, talking about everything and nothing. When the meal was finished and the dishes cleared, Isaac took Violet's hand and led her back outside to the porch. The stars were beginning to emerge and the night air was cold and clean. "I have something for you," Isaac said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small wooden box. Inside was a ring, simple silver with a small turquoise stone set in the center. "It is not much," he said, suddenly nervous in a way she had never seen him before. "I had it made by the silversmith in town, and the turquoise comes from a mine near Santa Fe. I chose it because the stone is the color of the sky out here, and because turquoise is supposed to bring protection and strength to whoever wears it." Violet's throat tightened with emotion as she looked at the ring, simple and beautiful and perfect. "Isaac." He dropped to one knee, still holding the box, and looked up at her with such love in his eyes that she felt tears begin to slide down her cheeks. "Violet Owens, you are the strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. You have shown me what true partnership can look like, what it means to stand beside someone rather than in front of or behind them. I promise you that if you marry me, I will never ask you to be anything other than yourself. I will support your work and respect your independence. I will be as faithful to you as any dog you have ever trained, as constant as the stars above us. Will you marry me? Will you take this cowboy and make him the luckiest man in the territory? Yes, Violet said, the word coming out as half laugh, half sob. Yes, Isaac, I will marry you. I will be your wife and your partner and your friend for as long as we both live. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, the turquoise catching the starlight and gleaming like a promise. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with joy and relief and profound love, and Violet kissed him back with everything she had. All the feeling she had kept locked away for so many years, finally free to express itself. They married in February of 1883 in the same small church where Isaac had proposed. Violet wore a simple dress of deep blue that she had made herself, and Isaac wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. His sister and her family came from Santa Fe, and several ranchers and their families attended, along with most of the town of Chloride. It was a modest wedding but felt enormous in its significance, the public declaration of a private commitment. Mr. Patterson gave them a week off for a honeymoon, and they traveled to Albuquerque, staying in a hotel and exploring the city like tourists. It was strange and wonderful to be away from the ranch and the homestead, to have time that belonged entirely to them without the demands of work or animals or other people. They talked about their future, making plans and dreaming dreams, and Violet felt herself relaxing into the reality of marriage in a way she had not quite managed before. "I want us to buy more land," she told Isaac as they sat in a restaurant, enjoying food someone else had prepared. "If we combine our savings, we could expand the homestead, build better facilities. I want to grow the business, take on more clients, maybe even train other people in my methods." "That sounds perfect," Isaac agreed. "And I have been thinking I might want to start raising horses in addition to cattle. There is always demand for good working horses, and it would complement what you do with training." They were building something together, Violet realized. Not his dream or her dream, but a shared vision that drew on both their strengths and interests. This was what partnership truly meant. When they returned to Chloride, they settled into married life with surprising ease. Isaac moved his few possessions to Violet's homestead permanently, and they began the work of improving the property. They added a barn large enough for horses, expanded the training pens, and built a proper workshop where Violet could craft the specialized equipment she used in her training. Word of Violet's marriage spread quickly, and she worried briefly that ranchers would no longer take her seriously now that she was someone's wife. But if anything, her reputation grew stronger. Isaac's obvious respect for her work and his willingness to support, rather than control her, seemed to impress the conservative ranching community. They began referring to the homestead as the Turner Place, though Violet kept her own name for business purposes, and clients came from further away than ever before. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. Violet discovered she was pregnant in April, a development that filled her with equal parts excitement and terror. She had meant what she said about wanting children, but the reality of carrying a life inside her, of being responsible for another human being, was overwhelming in ways she had not quite anticipated. "What if I am terrible at this?" she confessed to Isaac one night, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "What if I do not have the instincts for motherhood that I have for animals?" "Then you will learn, the same way you learn everything else," Isaac said practically. "You will observe and adapt and figure it out." and I will be right there beside you, probably making mistakes of my own, and we will muddle through together." His matter-of-fact confidence helped settle her nerves. She continued working throughout her pregnancy, training dogs and helping Isaac with the horses they had begun acquiring. As her belly grew, she adapted her methods, working smarter rather than harder, and discovered that pregnancy did not make her weak or incapable, just different. Their daughter was born in December of 1883, arriving during a cold snap that frosted the windows and made the desert shimmer with ice. The birth was long and difficult, attended by a midwife from town and Isaac, who refused to leave Violet's side despite the midwife's insistence that childbirth was women's work. Violet was grateful for his presence, his hand firm in hers, his voice steady when she felt like she might break apart from the pain and effort. They named the baby Emma, after Isaac's mother, and she was perfect in the way that all new parents believe their children are perfect. She had Violet's green eyes and Isaac's dark hair, and she screamed with impressive lung power that suggested she would never be a quiet, docile child. Motherhood was harder than training wild animals, and more rewarding than anything Violet had ever attempted. Emma demanded everything, her tiny presence reorganizing the entire household around her needs. But Violet found that she did not resent the changes the way she had feared she might. Instead, she discovered new reserves of love she had not known she possessed, a fierce protectiveness that extended beyond the animals she cared for to this small human who depended on her completely. Isaac proved to be a devoted father, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor with Emma during the night when she fussed. He sang to her in his deep voice, old cowboy songs and lullabies he remembered from his own childhood, and Violet would watch them together and feel her heart swell with emotions too big for words. "You were right," she told him one evening when Emma was 3 months old. They were sitting on the porch, the baby asleep in Violet's arms, watching the sunset paint the sky. "About being able to have both. My work and a family, love and independence. I did not believe it was possible, but you have proven me wrong." "We proved it together," Isaac corrected, his arm coming around her shoulders. "You did not give up who you are, Violet. You just expanded to include more. There is a difference." The years passed with the peculiar speed that comes from being busy and happy. Emma grew into a bright, curious child who followed her mother around the training pens and begged to help with the dogs. When she was 3, Violet became pregnant again, and this time she felt more prepared, more confident in her ability to balance work and motherhood. Their son was born in the spring of 1887, a healthy boy they named James after Violet's father. He was quieter than Emma had been, more content to observe than demand attention, and he seemed to have inherited Violet's natural understanding of animals. By the time he could walk, he was toddling after the dogs with fearless determination, and Violet knew she would have at least one child who would want to learn her trade. The homestead continued to grow and prosper. Isaac's horse breeding operation became well known throughout the territory, and Violet's reputation as a trainer spread even further. They hired help as needed, young men and women who wanted to learn their methods, and they turned the property into something that felt like a small school for animal training and horsemanship. Mr. Patterson remained one of their best clients, and he and Isaac developed a friendship that went beyond employer and employee. When Patterson's wife died in 1889, Isaac was one of the pallbearers at her funeral, and the old rancher became a regular visitor to the Turner homestead, bringing gifts for the children and sitting on the porch to share stories and advice. "You have built something remarkable here," Patterson told Violet one afternoon when Emma was 7 and James was 2. They were watching the children play with a litter of puppies. Violet was socializing for future training. A business, a family, a legacy. Your parents would be proud. I hope so, Violet said, meaning it. She thought often of her father, who had understood her love of animals, and her mother, who had worried so much about her unconventional daughter's future. If they could see her now, happily married and successful in her own right, perhaps they would understand that her choices had been the right ones after all. Life was not without its challenges. There were droughts that stressed the land and their resources. There were clients who did not pay on time or dogs that proved too damaged to fully rehabilitate. Emma went through a period of nightmares when she was 5 that had Violet and Isaac taking turns sitting with her through the long nights. James broke his arm falling from a horse when he was 4, and Violet felt the terror of nearly losing something precious. But through all the difficulties, Violet and Isaac remained a united front, supporting each other through every crisis and celebrating every success. Their love deepened and matured, becoming less about the initial spark of attraction and more about the profound respect and partnership they had built together. On their 10th anniversary, Isaac surprised Violet with a trip back to Albuquerque, arranging for Patterson to watch the children and the homestead for a week. They stayed in the same hotel where they had honeymooned, and on their last night they sat on the balcony of their room, looking out at the lights of the city. "Do you ever regret it?" Isaac asked, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "Marrying me, giving up the absolute independence you had before?" Violet considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. "I do not regret anything," she said finally. "I worried that marriage would diminish me, that I would have to become smaller to fit into someone else's life. But you have never asked me to be smaller, Isaac. You have encouraged me to grow, to expand, to become more than I was. That is not a loss of independence. That is the best kind of partnership." "I am glad," he said, squeezing her hand, "because you have made me better than I ever could have been alone. You have taught me patience and understanding. You have shown me that strength can be gentle and gentleness can be strong. You have given me a family and a home and a purpose beyond just working cattle. You have given me everything, Violet." She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "You proved yourself, you know. You promised you would be as faithful as any dog I have trained, and you have been. More faithful even because you chose it every day. You continue to choose it. That is the most powerful kind of love." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one, and Violet reflected on the strange and wonderful path her life had taken. She had started as a woman determined to remain alone and independent, convinced that love and partnership were traps that would steal her autonomy. And then, Isaac Turner had ridden into her life and shown her a different possibility, one where two strong people could stand together without either having to bend or break. The years continued to unfold. Emma grew into a young woman with her mother's determination and her father's easy charm. She announced at 15 that she wanted to be a veterinarian, one of the few professions opening to women in the changing times of the 1890s, and Violet and Isaac supported her ambition wholeheartedly. They sent her to school in Denver, where she could receive proper training, and she wrote home regularly with stories of her studies and her determination to return to New Mexico and serve the ranching community. James stayed close to home, learning everything his parents could teach him about training and horses. He had his mother's gift with animals and his father's patience, and by the time he was 16, he was already taking on clients of his own, working under Violet's supervision but clearly demonstrating that he would one day continue the family business. Violet continued training dogs well into her 40s, her reputation such that people traveled from Arizona and Texas specifically to work with her. She trained other trainers too, passing on her methods to a new generation who would carry her philosophy forward. She wrote articles for agricultural journals about her techniques, carefully explaining the principles of patience and respect that had guided her work from the beginning. Isaac remained active in the ranching community, serving as an advocate for better land management and more humane treatment of working animals. His opinion carried weight, and he used his influence to push for changes that benefited both animals and the people who worked with them. He and Violet became known throughout the territory as a formidable partnership, two people who had built something meaningful through collaboration and mutual respect. When New Mexico achieved statehood in 1912, Violet was 53 years old and Isaac was 56. They attended the celebration in Santa Fe with their children and grandchildren, part of the crowd that cheered as their home officially joined the Union. It felt symbolic somehow, this transition from territory to state, as though the wildness they had known in their youth was being transformed into something more settled and civilized. "You miss it?" Emma asked her mother as they stood watching the festivities. "The old days when things were wilder and less regulated." Violet considered the question, looking around at the modern world that had grown up around them. There were automobiles now, and telephones, and all manner of conveniences that would have seemed like magic when she first came to Chloride. The frontier had been officially declared closed for over 20 years, the wild spaces she had known filled in with settlements and roads in progress. "I miss some things," she admitted. "The quiet, the sense of endless possibility, the feeling that we were creating something entirely new. But I do not miss the hardship or the isolation or the constant struggle. And I would not trade what we have built for anything, not the business or the family or the life your father and I have created together." "You and Dad are kind of legendary, you know," Emma said with a smile. "People talk about you two as the ideal partnership, the proof that marriage does not have to mean one person dominating the other." Violet laughed softly. "I think they give us too much credit. We have had our struggles and our disagreements. Your father and I are both stubborn people with strong opinions. But we learned early on that we were stronger together than apart, and we have tried to remember that even when things were difficult." Isaac joined them then, James at his side, and the four of them stood together watching the new state of New Mexico celebrate its identity. They were a family built on love and respect, on the belief that people could choose to be loyal and faithful, could choose partnership over domination, could choose to support rather than control. As the years continued to pass, Violet gradually handed over more of the daily training work to James and the assistants they had trained. She remained involved, still consulting on difficult cases and still teaching whenever someone sought her expertise, but she also allowed herself to slow down, to enjoy the fruits of decades of hard work. She and Isaac took up traveling, visiting Emma in Denver, where she had established a successful veterinary practice, and exploring parts of the country they had never seen. They took a train all the way to California once, marveling at the ocean and the mountains and the vast diversity of landscapes that made up their nation. But they always came back to New Mexico, to the homestead they had built together, to the land that had witnessed their love story from its tentative beginning to its mature fruition. On their 40th anniversary, in 1923, their children and grandchildren gathered at the homestead for a celebration. The property had grown significantly over the years, now encompassing over 100 acres and including multiple buildings for training, housing, and Isaac's horse operation. 3 generations of Turners moved through the spaces Violet and Isaac had created, living proof that their partnership had borne fruit beyond just their own happiness. 40 years, Isaac said as they stood together on the porch that evening, watching the sun set just as they had done thousands of times before. He was 76 now, his dark hair completely silver, his face lined with the marks of a life fully lived. But his eyes were still the same warm brown that had first caught Violet's attention, and his smile still made her heart skip a beat. 40 years, Violet agreed, leaning into him. She was 64, her auburn hair now mostly gray, her body bearing the aches and pains of decades of physical work. But she felt no regrets, no sense that life had cheated her or passed her by. She had lived fully and loved deeply, and that was more than most people could claim. If you could go back and do it all again, would you change anything? Isaac asked, echoing the question from so many years before, but with the weight of 4 decades to inform the answer. Violet thought about the scared young woman she had been, so determined to protect her independence that she had almost missed out on the greatest partnership of her life. She thought about the risk she had taken in loving Isaac, the vulnerability she had accepted, the fears she had overcome. She thought about their children and grandchildren, the legacy they had built together, the business that would continue long after they were gone. "I would not change a single thing," she said with complete conviction. "Every moment, every choice, every challenge led us here to this life we have created. I love you, Isaac Turner. I have loved you for 40 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left." "And I love you, Violet Turner," he replied, using her married name though she had kept her maiden name for business throughout their entire marriage. "You took a chance on a cowboy who promised to be faithful, and I have spent 4 decades trying to be worthy of that trust. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thank God every day that I had the courage to ride out to your homestead all those years ago." They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon. 2 people who had chosen each other every day for 40 years, who had proved that love could be both passionate and practical, that partnership could exist without possession, that faithfulness was not just for dogs but for humans who were willing to work at it. The party continued inside, their family celebrating with food and music and laughter, but Violet and Isaac stayed on the porch a while longer, content in each other's presence and the life they had built. The dogs that were always part of their household lay at their feet, and in the distance they could hear the soft nickering of horses settling down for the night. It was the soundtrack of their life together, the sounds of animals and family and home. Isaac lived to be 81, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1928 after a full day of working with the horses he loved. Violet held his hand as he took his last breath, and though the grief was profound and overwhelming, she was grateful that he had not suffered, that he had remained active and engaged with life right up until the end. They had been married for 45 years, nearly half a century of partnership and love, and the hole his absence left in her life felt impossible to fill. But Violet was not a woman who gave up easily. She continued running the homestead with James's help, still training dogs when her health permitted, still offering wisdom and guidance to the younger trainers who sought her expertise. She was grandmother and great-grandmother to a large and loving family, and she took comfort in seeing her values and her methods passed down through the generations. She lived another 7 years without Isaac, years that were harder and lonelier than any that had come before, but also rich with memory and meaning. She spent time recording her training methods in detailed journals, ensuring that her knowledge would not be lost. She told stories to her grandchildren and great-grandchildren about the old days, about the wild territory that had become a tame state, about the cowboy who had proved himself as faithful as any dog she had ever trained. Violet Owens Turner passed away in her sleep in the spring of 1935, at the age of 76. She died in the bedroom she had shared with Isaac for 45 years, in the house they had built together, on the land that represented everything they had created through partnership and love. Her family found her in the morning with a slight smile on her face, and they liked to think she had gone to join Isaac, wherever faithful hearts went when their earthly journey ended. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, ranchers and trainers and families who had been touched by Violet's work over the decades. They spoke of her skill and her integrity, her strength and her compassion, her revolutionary ideas about training that had transformed the way people worked with animals. But mostly they spoke of her partnership with Isaac, the legendary love story that had inspired generations and proved that two people could stand together as equals, supporting and strengthening each other without either losing themselves in the process. Emma and James inherited the homestead, continuing the work their parents had started. The business flourished under their management, expanding to include not just dog training but veterinary services and advanced horsemanship instruction. The Turner name became synonymous with ethical animal treatment and innovative training methods, all built on the foundation Violet and Isaac had laid decades before. The porch where Violet and Isaac had spent so many evenings together became a kind of shrine, preserved as closely as possible to how it had looked during their lifetime. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would sit there in the evenings, watching the same sunsets their ancestors had watched, and they would tell the story of the woman who trained dogs for ranchers and the loyal cowboy who proved he was just as faithful. It became family legend, the romance that had started a legacy, the love that had built an empire. And on quiet nights when the wind was right and the stars were bright, the people who lived at the Turner homestead swore they could feel the presence of Violet and Isaac, still watching over the land they had loved, still together in whatever form love took when it transcended the boundaries of mortality. Their story had begun with a scared dog and a patient woman, with a respectful cowboy who understood that true partnership meant supporting rather than controlling, and it had ended with a legacy that would last for generations, proof that faithfulness and love could conquer any obstacle if two people were willing to work together. The desert that had witnessed their courtship continued its eternal cycle of seasons, harsh and beautiful and unforgiving to those who did not understand it. But for those who did, for those who approached it with respect and patience and the willingness to work within its rhythms rather than against them, it offered rewards beyond measure. That was the lesson Violet and Isaac had learned together, the wisdom they had passed down to their children and grandchildren and everyone they had trained over the years. Love was not about possession or domination. It was about partnership, about two people choosing to face the challenges of life together, supporting each other's strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses. It was about faithfulness, the kind that had to be chosen and renewed every single day, the kind that did not come naturally but had to be cultivated and maintained like any valuable thing. It was about respect, the deep and abiding recognition that the person you loved was a complete human being with their own dreams and needs and purposes, and that true love meant helping them fulfill those things rather than asking them to sacrifice everything. That was the story of Violet Owens and Isaac Turner, the dog trainer and the cowboy, the partnership that had become legend. It was a story of the Wild West, but more than that, it was a story about human connection and the choices people make when they decide to love each other not in spite of their differences, but because of them. It was a story about faithfulness and loyalty, about proving through action rather than just words that commitment meant something real and lasting. And it was a story with a happy ending, which was perhaps the most remarkable thing of all. In a time and place known for hardship and struggle, for lonely homesteads and failed dreams, Violet and Isaac had created something beautiful and enduring. They had loved each other for over 4 decades, raised children who carried on their values, built a business that served their community, and created a legacy that would last for generations. They had proved that the Wild West was not just a place of violence and chaos, but also a place where two people could find each other and build a life together that honored both their individual identities and their shared dreams. Their graves sat side by side on a hill overlooking the homestead, simple markers that bore their names and the dates that bracketed their earthly lives. But their true monument was the land itself, the thriving business, the family that continued to grow and flourish, and the countless animals and people whose lives they had touched with their wisdom and their example. That was the legacy of faithfulness, the reward for choosing love and partnership over fear and isolation. And so the story ended where all good love stories should end, not with death or separation, but with the triumph of love over all obstacles, with the proof that two people committed to each other could overcome anything the world threw at them. Violet had trained dogs for ranchers, teaching them loyalty and obedience and trust. Isaac had proved he was just as faithful, demonstrating through 45 years of marriage that humans could choose to be as devoted and true as any animal, could choose partnership and respect over domination and control. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through generations as an example of what love could be when two people approached it with honesty and courage, and the willingness to work at it every single day. And though Violet and Isaac were gone, their story lived on, inspiring everyone who heard it to believe that true partnership was possible, that love did not require sacrifice of self, and that faithfulness was not just an ideal but a choice that could be made and kept through all the days of one's life.